Hello and good evening. This is Janine Bolon with the Mystic MasterMind. This is Janine Bolon with the Mystic MasterMind. This started as the Crow Lodge. Wow, probably back in 2013, something like that, 2012. We've been running once a month meetings for years and years, and we moved online and it continues to grow and expand. One of the things I wanted to share with you guys today is these are the core books that we use as practical mystics. Now, many of you know the Practical Mystic Show was one of the first podcasts I ever ran. It started in 2016, ended up getting syndicated in 2020, and it evolved into the Janine Bolon Show. But one of the things that I've always done is I've always wanted to reach out to people who could see things, experience things, felt things that other people around them didn't. They felt they were crazy. They thought something was wrong with them. And as we all have come to learn, no, nothing was wrong with you. Actually, you just had a lot of sensory experiences that other people didn't. So one of the things we recommend is that if you choose, feel free to grab these 4 books and make them a part of your library. And I am very self-serving. I have the 3rd book in the Divine series. This book was written for my Crow Lodge members. So Expressing the Divine, a guidebook for the enlightened soul. Yep, that's the book I wrote after 25 years of meditation and working with different mystics. I boiled it all down into a book that was less than 100 pages and literally is just brass tacks. If you're wanting lots of flowery stories and stuff like that, not going to happen. This is systems, routines, principles in that book. The other one that I highly recommend for those of you who may be dealing with what they call the pain body, or you kind of have runaway emotions that you don't understand sometimes, that is Ask and It's Given. That book will help you deal with depression and anger issues that you may not understand why you have them. That book will help you. It also helps you manifest the things that you desire. I've used it myself multiple times. I have used process number 21 that is in Ask and It's Given, and I have healed myself of 2 terminal conditions because I have used the systems in this book. So that is why I love this book so much. And I'll show you later, but this is my copy, and it is like, this is the 2nd book I've had to do because I have been through the pages so many times that I have pages started falling out and I had to get another book on that. The 2nd book, and this is more for the cognitive folks of us, the more analytical, and that's definitely me. Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life Purpose. If you're dealing with things regarding the ego, or you're having subroutine programming that's popping up in your world where the ego is trying to defend itself and you're kind of tired of having to deal with the annoyances of that, I highly recommend that you read Eckhart Tolle. I used to recommend The Power of Now, but this book is his 2nd book. Oh, so much better than The Power of Now. The Power of Now was very heavy. It was difficult for a lot of people to follow. He really became well, it happens with all writers. You get better at your craft, you get better at your art. He's taught a lot more. And so A New Earth is the one that I recommend now. That's Eckhart Tolle. And if you're kind of hesitant to invest in these books, then go onto YouTube and watch the videos that are free, and you'll kind of get an idea on all of these teachers. Now, the book that we use anytime we have disagreements or anytime somebody starts having, gets triggered or something like that, it's The 4 Agreements by Don Rayuz. Anytime you want to build a community of any kind, I highly recommend that you always refer people, go to this cute little book, The 4 Agreements, and we'll talk more about it later. But anytime I have a mystic that says, okay, I want to start building community, I want to start reaching out, I want to have more impact, I'm like, do you have a copy of The 4 Agreements? They're like, well, no, I have it on my Kindle. Go get yourself the 3-dimensional book, because you're going to be using that as a handbook for the rest of your time with it. I highly recommend that. So that's how we get started with this. So these are the 4 books that we use, and we'll be referring to them as we move along. So as I said at the beginning, grab your pen and paper. We're going to be taking some notes today. All right. How do you read a book? Well, I have been a college professor longer than I care to admit, 30 years. And so one of the things I've learned is that I have walked through many book clubs, many how do you read a book classes with my students, that sort of thing. And this is what I recommend. The reason I wanted you guys to go out and buy the paperback versions of those copies of the book is because when you're reading it, as you go through the book, you may have your little notebooks and your little post-it notes and what have you. But at the back of the book, usually on these covers are blank. And I recommend that you write the page number and the quote that you want to bring up at the next meeting. I highly recommend that you set up a system for yourself so that you write down the page number, write down the quote, and that way we can all go to it. So we all will have these books, okay? And then as you say, okay, I have a question about page such and such and book number such and such, I would like us to address it as a community, and then we can do that. And so one of my questions that I had in A New Earth back here was on page 104, and it was called formless parenting. And I wanted other parents examples, or even people that hadn't had parents. I wanted help with understanding that particular line that was in there. And so we all read the paragraph together and worked that out. So that is how we do the books in this Mystic MasterMind. And so I'd like for you guys, as you're reading through there, if you have questions or you're like, hey, I'd like somebody else's perspective on this, this is why I call people like this the brain trust, because there's a lot of good wisdom sitting here in this room right now. Let's make good use of it. So that's how to read a book. As you're reading it, there are questions that you will ask yourself. The whole point of reading books, in my opinion, when it comes to self-help books like this, is it's not to get through the book, but to get the book through you. And that was my mentor, Dr. Oliver DeMille, when he first was standing up at the front of class doing that. I thought he was being very, kind of hokey. You just turn the words around and, everybody, talks about this, but it truly is get the book through you. And these are the 3 questions to be asking yourself as you're reading through these self-help books. Does this apply to me? I mean, sometimes, it's a really great book and everything, but it doesn't apply to you, like you've already moved past these lessons, or these lessons are not appropriate for you at this phase of your life, right? So I want you to definitely keep that in mind. And is it of value to my particular life and my goals? Now, a lot of people in the self-help community, a lot of people in the spiritual community are always like, well, I gave up on goals. It's all about flow. And I just use the law of attraction and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, that's fine. So it's not appropriate for your life to be a goal setter. Okay. Maybe you were over type A for so long, and now you're trying to actually learn how to live life with structure, but not goals. And so it just depends on where you are and what you're doing and what you want to work on. So definitely educate us on what your goals or your lack of goals are. Maybe you just want to do targets or something like that in your life. And then to me, this was the most important question I learned from Dr. DeMille, and that was, how will I integrate what I just read? To me, this was the most powerful thing for that phase of my life, because I had 4 children under the age of 7. All 4 were under the age of 7. I was incredibly busy. I was working on my master's degree at the time. And when I would read these amazing classics, I would be like, how can I integrate this? And a lot of times it was, I frankly did not have time. There was no way I was going to be able to integrate what I just read. But, wanted to share this with you. That's a good question to ask yourself. So let's talk about the 4 agreements, because this is how we run a lot of our community. And that is, many of you maybe you already read this, but it's be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Now, kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this. What does it mean, be impeccable with your word? It means say what you mean and mean what you say. You heard that from grandma probably. But the other thing is sometimes, and I love this because Gandhi talked about it in his autobiography, where he said, if you hear me say something and it's in contradiction to something you have seen me write, please pay attention to what was the latest version of what I understood. So he was actually saying, as he got older, his truth changed. And as he got more experience, his truth changed. And so he actually says this in his autobiography. Please pay attention to what I say later in life rather than what I said earlier in life, because I probably had a lot more experience by the time I said something in my 30s rather than something I said when I was a teenager. So just an idea. Be impeccable with your word to the best of your ability. Don't take anything personally. Now, this is hard to do, especially because the ego does not like to be threatened in any way or insulted in any way. But one of the interesting things, and this comes from Tocqueville, and I don't know if anybody has read Tocqueville, but it was a requirement of my master's education. Tocqueville came to the United States 100 years after our country had been founded. And he toured the Great West, and that happened to be Ohio. That was the great frontier at the time. And he described America in a way that was quite interesting. He said one of the things he noticed about democratic environments was the less there seemed to be less problem the more that you had a disparity between different groups. The higher the disparity, the less ruffling of the waters there was, the less cries of injustice that was happening. But the more different groups and races and people, the more equal it became. The little bit of disturbance of the water would cause a huge hue and cry that would rise up. And he just noticed this about democracies. And it's something that I've noticed in our world today, that people are getting very upset, taking things personally to such an nth degree, you don't even know what to say anymore because somebody is insulted by something you've said. It can be as bad as you mistakenly call somebody a him and they identify as a her, right? And so in this group, we just ask you, try to calm that a bit, realize that it's the ego trying to express itself and differentiate itself in a very democratic way. And we're one of the few countries that has this luxury. The other one is don't make assumptions. Please don't assume that the person that is speaking knows what you know. And also, please don't make the assumption that you can't learn anything from somebody on the other side. One of the assumptions that I actually have is that I make the assumption that everyone that speaks has something to teach me. So it just depends on you. When it says don't make assumptions, I always tell people, yeah, but just be aware of the assumptions you're making. And that's why I like to share that with you guys. And then lastly, always do your best. Please realize that your best is going to change day to day. When I was a mother with 4 children under the age of 7, and I had a condition at the time that I hadn't healed from yet. And while I had that condition, there were some days my best was being able to get up in the morning, not necessarily get dressed, but get up in the morning, do a load of laundry and do a load of dishes. And that was the best I could do that day. And then we sat around and watched a lot of TV with the kids. And I was teaching them how to make their own macaroni and cheese, just because that's all I physically could do. So realize each day doing your best is going to look different. Just give yourself that grace, please. Okay. On A New Earth with Eckhart Tolle, some of the chapters that I like you to kind of pay attention to because they are extremely helpful in this modern age, and that is the core of the ego. When he talks about that, I'll go to the index here real quick and open it up so you can get the page numbers. But the core of the ego starts on page 59 in the hardback version of this. It's chapter 3. And then chapter 4 is role playing, the many faces of the ego. And he talks about how the ego will be the villain, it'll be the victim, or it'll be the lover. And so depending upon what's happening in your worldview, that would be good for you to kind of work on. This one is especially important for women, and that is the pain body, because the birth of that happens right as we go through menstruation for the first time. And that's why our teenage years are so catastrophic. But it also comes back during menopause. And so the pain body is something you definitely want to be aware of. That's chapter 5. It starts on page 129. And then this chapter was my all-time favorite in this book. And that was Finding Who You Truly Are, page 185. That's chapter 7. And so those are some of the big chapters that I felt were the most beneficial for folks who were over the age of 35 and being introduced to Eckhart Tolle. Those were quite helpful. When it comes to expressing the divine, the areas that you may find of most help is the end of sorrow. Now that's just basically Buddhism. That is all of Buddhism. The point for that religion was how to end your sorrow. And it wasn't that you wouldn't have any negativity in your life. It was you would not be as horrifically affected. You wouldn't have quite the roller coaster of emotions and mental trauma to yourself by following those principles. The other thing that I really wanted to work on with expressing the divine was living fearlessly. Now, that doesn't mean I did not experience fear. And this is something that when you talk about the differences between men and women, women live in fear. We have to deal with fear on a day by day, sometimes minute by minute basis. I used to demonstrate this to my male students by saying, how many of you have had an experience where you really felt like I am going to die, like you had a life or death, and you'd have certain number of hands go up in the classroom. And then I'd say, how many of you have had that feeling or that experience in the past 5 years? And then that was, some hands would lower. And then I'd say, how many of you have had a challenge in the last 3 months where you felt like you were in a fight or flight response? To the point that we'd get down to how many of you have felt in fear, like you felt the fight or flight response kick in today. And almost always all the men had dropped their hands. They weren't raising them, but always that's where the women fight that fear almost every day. They have to deal with it in some fashion. And so living fearlessly is you still feel the fear, but you have learned how to mitigate and control it. Okay. And so that's something that's kind of helpful to know, is because we sometimes think we're the only ones that are having to deal with some of these things, and we aren't. The 4 disciplines, we'll get to that in a minute, and 3-minute meditation. So the 4 disciplines that I cover in the book are the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual disciplines. Now, everybody kind of has their own version of these things, but it's helpful to actually have these somewhere on a piece of paper or have a circle broken into 4 quadrants where you are dealing with these on a week by week basis. The questions that I have found that really help people when they're drilling down on the disciplines are, am I worthy enough? The answer is yes. You are a divine being on the planet Earth. And unfortunately, the ego likes to test you and stir up emotional and mental trauma by making you feel like you're not worthy enough. You're not good enough. You're not safe enough. I use the word worthy. Am I worthy enough? But you can put a lot of different words in there and you'll see where the ego likes to stimulate trauma in there. Because remember, the ego likes to feed on fear or distress or some sort of negative emotions. And so if it gets too quiet in that brain case, it'll stir the pot for you. Am I strong enough? This can be physical, emotional, or mental, sometimes spiritual, but usually it's mental or emotional. Am I abandoned? I hate to be the one to break this to you, but there are 2 things I guarantee every person on the planet has, and that is they don't feel they're worthy enough for love. And number 2, they feel abandoned. That just seems to be something that happens to us as we come into this. One is, am I alone? You can be physically alone and still feel like you have a huge group of people around you as a mystic. And then you also have the reverse where you can feel alone in a crowd. And so those are some things to kind of work on with the ego. And the last one, am I the only one who feels this way? And for my male students, I always like to say, am I the only one who does it this way? Feeling is more on the feminine side and doing is more on the masculine side. So I like to switch that up for folks. When it comes to your physical discipline, here are some questions that I think might help you as you move forward this week. I know we're sitting here on a Tuesday, but kind of give yourself some time to chew on this and see how it might serve you. What do you do daily that helps you feel better? And then for the male students, I always say, what do you do daily that helps you do better? Okay, so figure out which word works best for you. But the importance of this is by knowing what helps you do better or feel better, that will calm you no matter what kind of trauma response or triggering that you're going through. What helps you work better? What helps you walk better? We kind of take walking for granted unless we've had some sort of experience where we weren't able to walk. But I would like you to start focusing on your physicality. This will keep you in a state of harmonization, because if you start noticing that you're walking weird, that lets you know that there's something going on in your field of influence that you need to pay attention to. And what helps you eat better? Okay, kind of set yourself up. What we're trying to do with these questions is we want you to focus on what you're doing well. By focusing on what you are doing well, that's the first step to healing the areas of your life that you may not be doing so well in. So we always focus on what is it that you can do to help you feel better, do better, work better, walk better, eat better. And then those first steps can be very small, and yet they will help you as you move forward. All right. 3-minute meditations in the Expressing the Divine book. You can look at that on page 67. That's the spiritual discipline. You can decide how best to operate that on your own.